Hi, I'm Jim. I work for the Wyoming State Museum, and recently I have taken to using my phone to do some short videos on objects in the collection that I find interesting. And today I wanted to share with you a very fragile 14-star United States flag that has a pretty interesting history. And here it is. Now we know that this flag dates to at least 1864, probably at least a few years earlier than that, but it might date as far back as 1791. That was the year that Vermont became the 14th state in the Union. Now, there never really was an official 14-star United States flag. The number of stars on the flag went from 13 to 15 officially, because Vermont and Kentucky came into the Union so close to each other. But that's not to say that there weren't some very patriotic Vermontians, correct me on that, whatever the proper term is, people from Vermont. There were some patriotic people from Vermont who made their own unofficial 14-star United States flags. And this very well could be one of those, but we have no documentation to prove that one way or the other. But we do know that this flag dates to, as I said, at least 1864, and we'll get to that in a minute. Some other interesting things to point out in this flag is there's a bullet hole right here. There is a bullet hole here. There is a bullet hole right there. And there's a bullet hole right there. So during the Civil War, the Union Navy took to blockading southern ports. And the reason for that was obviously to keep the Confederates from getting much needed material and supplies for the army, but it also was a way to try and cripple the Confederate economy. Well, the Confederates didn't take that lying down, and so they had a number of ships that were known as blockade runners. And the job of the blockade runners was to, of course, run the blockade in the hope of either taking goods out for sale from the Confederacy or to bring things in from other countries that could help the war effort for the South. A couple of these ships were not only blockade runners, they were also raiders. And there were two very well-known raiders. One was the Confederate ship Alabama. Another one was the Confederate ship Florida. And they didn't just try to run blockades, they went out and actually preyed on northern shipping. And the chances of them being able to put a huge dent in the northern economy, that's something that's up for debate. But one of the things that it did do was it made the Union Navy have to chase after them, which meant that the blockades were just a little bit less effective. Well, the Union had ships specifically designated to go out and chase down these Confederate raiders, and one of those ships was known as the Wachusett. It was launched in 1862, and its first goal out of its birth was to hunt down ships like the Alabama and the Florida. Well, for 2 years, Captain Napoleon Collins of the Wachusett patrolled the Atlantic trying to find some of these Confederate raiders, and it finally caught up with one of the raiders, ship, the one known as the Florida, and there were quite a few of them, but the Florida and the Alabama are two of the more well-known. But Napoleon Collins and the Wachusett caught up with the Confederate raider Florida in the port of Bahia in Brazil in October of 1864. Napoleon Collins was determined that the Florida was not going to escape him after chasing after it for 2 years. And so he dropped anchor in the entrance to Bahia's port and decided that he was going to wait for the Confederate raider to come out. Well, the provincial governor in Brazil didn't want any combat to take place in his port, so he sent a word to Napoleon Collins saying, look, the Florida can be here for 2 days to get some much needed supplies and to re-outfit a little bit, but then they're going to be made to sail out of the harbor, and then you can have your battle with them out in the Atlantic someplace, but I don't want you doing it in my harbor. Well, Napoleon Collins, maybe it was his name, Napoleon, that led him to be a little overzealous in the approach to his duties. he decided that he wasn't going to risk in any way the Florida managing to slip past him and get out into open water. And so on October 7th at 3 o'clock in the morning, figuring that most of the crew of the Florida was on shore, which they were, he sailed into Bahia Harbor, shelled the Florida a couple of times, rammed it, sent a boarding party aboard, quickly took it into tow, and hauled it out of Bahia Harbor into the Atlantic, all the while with Brazilian shore batteries firing at them. But they made it away safely, and once they got out into the Atlantic, these sailors were going through the hold of the Florida, and they came across this flag. And of course, there were no records kept of how the flag got there, but it was probably taken off of a Union merchantman that had been attacked by the Florida sometime in the previous couple of years. Anyway, the flag was taken from the Florida, and it was put on a pole in the bow of the Wachaset's cutter. Cutter is just a small boat that either is used for ship-to-ship transportation or ship-to-shore. But they took this flag and they put it on the bow of the cutter from the Wachaset. Well, the Wachaset made it back to American waters with the captured Florida, and they soon after that were sent to patrol duty at City Point, Virginia. And while off the coast of City Point, Virginia, they received a message from shore that there was a woman in need of medical assistance. And so the coxswain and some of the crew and the ship's doctor got into the cutter and sailed to shore to try and find this woman to give her some aid. And it soon turned out that they had sailed into a Confederate ambush. The whole thing had been a ruse, and the Confederates were just hoping to be able to kill a few of the men from the Wachaset. And that's where these bullet holes became a part of the flag. Again, there, and then these two over here. The cutter and its crew made it back to the Wachaset safely, and the war ended not too long after that. But when the men were mustering out of the Navy, the coxswain of the cutter took this flag as a souvenir of his time aboard the Wachaset during the war. And then later on in his life, he gave it to his son as a family heirloom. And then the son eventually moved to Sunrise, Wyoming in 1904. The last time that this flag was flown was in 1918, when a group of men from Sunrise decided that they needed to go and join the Marines in order to help the United States during World War I. And so the people of Sunrise, being very patriotic, they gave the men a parade from Sunrise to Guernsey, where they were going to catch the train to go to Denver to get their enlistment sorted out. And part of the parade was led by Boy Scouts from the area. And at the head of the Boy Scouts was this flag on a pole being carried by the lead Boy Scout as the parade made its way, again, from Sunrise to Guernsey to see the men off on their journey to fight in World War I. Not long after that, well, 20 years or so after that, I guess, the flag was donated to the Wyoming State Museum. That was in about 1949. And I'm glad that it came to us, because this is a flag that has a really, really interesting history. It's a well-traveled flag, and I just wish that it could tell us more tales of some of the things that it's been through. Anyway, 14-star United States flag taken from the Confederate ship Florida by the crew of the Wachaset in October of 1864. If you're interested in finding out more about the battle between the Wachaset and the Florida, there is quite a bit of information online about it, at least there was. The last time that I did any research, any in-depth research on this, it was a number of years ago, but the New York Times archive has some actual newspaper accounts of the battle that you can go and read. And you can also read up on what happened to Napoleon Collins for sailing into Bahia Harbor, neutral harbor, and attacking the Florida at that particular point in time. Really interesting series of events, really interesting story. And to me, it's all kind of encapsulated right here in this really interesting 14-star flag. If you have any questions about the flag, feel free to give me a call or send me an email. I'll do what I can to answer your questions. Or if you have any questions about any artifacts in the Wyoming State Museum, give us a call. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. It's what we do. Until next time, I'll see about, hopefully I'll be able to do another one of these in a couple of weeks. But until next time, stay safe, and we'll see you then.